Okay, so this is part 5 of the brainwashing in rail worker death investigation reports by the Transportation Safety Board and its rail partners in crime. Now, you're going to see this particular section on all the brainwashing videos because I need to keep everybody reminded as to the different documentation that fits into all of this. On the left, the Railway Safety Act. Then we have CTC Rail 3 or SOR 87-150, which is the Railway Employee Qualification Standards Regulation. And then the final document, TCO 0-102, the proposed new rules respecting minimum qualification standards for railway employees. So again, keep in mind, acts override regulations, regulations override rules, and all of these are used in, pulling information from one or the other or excluding the act, for example, completely from Jason's accident reports in order to give the proper effect that the Transportation Safety Board, Transport Canada, the rail carriers, whatever, want to give as they brainwash the public and all rail families, whether or not you are a frontline rail family, you are a investor as far as investing in rail carriers, whether or not you're a rail customer. There are many, many rail families that are impacted by all of these issues. And so, again, acts override regulations, regulations override rules, and then there's also guidelines, policies, whatever. Acts and regulations, definitely enforceable in court. The others may not be. So keep all that in mind as we continue to go through these brainwashing videos. So the previous section that was in green showed the regulation being approved, the process for that. This one shows for rules that they need to be filed with the minister per section 19 of the Railway Safety Act. And then if you look in point B there under 19, it says that they must be approved by the minister. So again, just want to give everybody the documentation that absolutely, without a doubt, shows all this stuff must be approved prior to field implementation. And then again, in the Railway Safety Act, you can see here that the minister is under obligation to consider the rules, and it doesn't have to be an entire rule document. It could just be a modification to a rule or one change. So everything needs to be approved. And then on the bottom here, excuse me, I added the effective date of the rules. And it states here under section 5.1, it states rules approved by the minister under subsection 4 come into force on a day specified by the minister, but if they replace any regulation, as was the case for that bogus document called TC 0-102, which was called Rules Respecting Minimum Qualification Standards for Railway Employees, when they tried to replace a regulation with a rule as a result of the Mackyard incident. It says here, if the rules replace any regulations, they may not come into force earlier than the day on which the regulations are repealed. And that was the very case with that bogus document. The version, again, with the union showed that it had been approved, but the version with the Railway Association of Canada, which created the document, was updated on that cover page just to show that the rules do not go into effect until the regulation is revoked or repealed. And that's where this comes from, is this law in the Railway Safety Act. So all that to take you back to this page 19 of this railway investigation report into the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney, when we are told that Transport Canada has no requirement to review the course material or evaluate the program. Yeah, they don't need to go back and reevaluate the entire program, but that is not really true what they're telling us here, because Again, every individual change to training programs must first be filed and approved by the Minister of Transportation per the Railway Safety Act and per the processes involved in the making of new regulations, according to the Government of Canada's own website. So the Minister of Transportation may not need to review the entire program, but there is zero doubt that changes to training programs made while that person is Minister of Transportation must be reviewed and approved by the Minister of Transportation. So it's all in how they word this, right? When they say we don't need to go back and evaluate the program. True, you don't need to reevaluate the entire program, but you do need to evaluate every change to the program. So it's at a very minute level, right? Everything must be approved. Okay, I just love how they write this section here on findings on page 20. And again, note the brainwashing that happens here. Note how things that are most attributable to the conductor trainee are provided as affirmatives or facts, basically. And how at the bottom, things that may be issues more for the rail carrier, well, most of those begin with an if, because, well, we don't want to say that those are facts. We want, it should say a when, in my opinion, for points 2 to 6. But anyways, I'm just going to read these real quick. Point 1 at the beginning, the accident occurred while the trainee was securing a derail mounted between the rails on track TS23 with his back to the train. Unaware of the approach, the trainee was struck by the train. Point 2, the required switching tasks likely conflicted with the trainee's mental model. So this is the whole psychological, situational awareness stuff. That's an assumption. They don't know what this trainee was thinking when he was installing the derail. And again, there are issues that fit into the situational awareness, which would have been warped because of what was provided to this trainee as far as training materials and potentially work documentation where the switch numbers did not match. And we're going to get into that again. And then point number 3, because the trainee had inadvertently reverse switched TS23 and mistakenly reported the mainline switch as lined and locked in the normal position for the main track, the entire crew was unaware that the train was not following its intended route. Well, yeah, that wasn't a fault of the trainee. That was a fault of, again, CN not having its supervising conductor trained in how to supervise a conductor trainee. And so there was nobody there to catch the fact that he switched the switch the wrong way and lined it for the siding where he was working in the dark, unsupervised, with nobody there to say, hey, you switched the switch the wrong way. So again, more of an issue for the rail carrier than the conductor trainee. Then the last point here, the conductor trainee who was unfamiliar with the territory and working without direct supervision misapplied a number of safety critical operational procedures. Well, no mention here of CN Rail violating laws like the one that prevents them from allowing a trainee to work in an occupational category for which they are not qualified. Trainees, by definition, are not qualified. Why was he working unsupervised with his supervising conductor half a mile to 2/3 of a mile away from him in the dark? So the violations, in my opinion, violating Canadian Rail operating rules or whatever, that's a much lower issue, not enforceable in court, unlike the acts and the regulations that, in my opinion, CN was absolutely violating. Now, as to findings as to risk, point number 1, if a loss of situational awareness occurs, administrative defenses such as rules and procedures may not always protect against switching errors, which increase the risk of an accident. again, we're talking about rules and procedures because that's what we wanted to focus on when we were talking about the analysis there, that block where I was showing what they're going to focus on, rules and procedures, as opposed to focusing on regulations and acts. So, and this first part here, if a loss of situational awareness occurs, again, they don't know what this conductor trainee was thinking. And, the whole thing on situational awareness, I'm going to get into in another video, but they don't know what he was thinking, and this is a huge assumption on the part of the writers because, hey, it fits their story that they're trying to give us, right, as readers of this garbage document, in my opinion. Now, notice points 2 through 6 here on the bottom. If conductor trainees work independently, doesn't say in violation of SOR 87-150 section 5 there, without direct supervision in close proximity, there is an increased risk of error which can result in an accident. Why doesn't that start with the word when? If evaluations conducted by other trainers are not reviewed, because there was maybe only supposed to be one trainer, and so it would have been a non-issue to have other trainers review the evaluations if there was only supposed to be one trainer for the trainee for the duration of all those 45 yard trips. So if evaluations conducted by other trainers are not reviewed, there's an increased risk that trainees will not be provided with adequate reinforcement of proper procedures and work practices. Again, why aren't you focusing on, labor laws as far as safety critical tasks and what the labor laws say as far as all the evaluations needing to be there, proper documentation, proper supervision in safety critical tasks of trainees, of people who aren't qualified? Let us focus on, rules and procedures and practices again. And why doesn't that point number 3 start with when? If, number 4, there is a reduced training period, an absence of direct supervision, and a lack of continuity and assessment among trainers, again, because, there was maybe only supposed to be one trainer in the field, conductor trainees may not apply rules and instructions correctly in the field. Again, we're focusing on rules and instructions and totally ignoring the violations of regulations and acts by the rail carrier, in my humble opinion. So that again increases the risk of an accident. And again, why does that not start with a when? All the things at the top here, points 1 through 4, those are pretty well presented as facts. Whereas at the bottom, it's just an if, because we don't want to upset those we work so closely with at the Railway Association of Canada, the Transportation Safety Board, the rail carriers, etc., right? So these are just ifs. These are not facts. These are just an if, right? Number 5, if an employee is required to be positioned between the rails to operate a hinge derail, there's an increased risk that a serious injury will occur. Well, that rule was, I think guideline 12.8 or something on installing a derail at CN Rail, and that basically forced the proper procedure at CN Rail to force the person installing a derail to be positioned between the rails in order to protect their backs and whatever. It was supposed to be for health and safety. And so, well, if you've got a trainee positioned between the rails per your instructions at CN Rail, and there's no supervising conductor looking out for that trainee who happened to have switched the switch the wrong way because there wasn't a supervising conductor there to say, hey, you flipped it the wrong way, flip it the other way. Well, again, of course you're going to have an accident. So why is this again an if? And then point number 6, if there is no regulatory oversight of the effectiveness of training programs for railway operating employees, there is increased risk that these programs may not be sufficiently robust to ensure the trainees have adequate practical experience to work independently and safely. Well, they're not supposed to be working independently as trainees. So why are you even writing this way? For trainees to have adequate practical experience to work independently and safely. They're not supposed to work independently. They're supposed to have a supervising conductor because according to SOR 87-150, Section 5.1a, they are not allowed to work alone as in an occupational category until they have qualified in that occupational category. So why would you even write this like this, right? Again, all those ifs, in my opinion, on the bottom should all be when. So, but Transportation Safety Board is only presenting the facts and it's not assigning blame, right? Okay, now remember, the Transportation Safety Board says, even, and I'll show you that when I go back in this report, but they state that they're not there to assign blame. They basically just provide the facts. But look at how this page, again, that we just reviewed, page 20, and tell me whether or not you agree that they're not there to assign blame to one party as opposed to the other. The first title here, the subtitle under findings, says findings as to causes. What caused the accident? And contributing factors. Now, these are all the things that are tied primarily to the trainee. But when it's things that are tied primarily to violations of laws by the rail carrier, oh, those findings are as to risk. It's just a risk. It's not a cause, just a risk. So you tell me this isn't the brainwashing of rail families and taxpayers. They are absolutely, by these subtitles, assigning blame. You know, a lawyer could just so easily rip this apart. To me, I find this so upsetting when I know so much about the death of conductor trainee Jason Clooney and all of the things that contributed to this death. Believe me, if I had written this report, Transport Canada, the Transportation Safety Board, the Occupational Health and Safety Tribunal of Canada, there'd be no place for those people to hide from the accountability that needs to happen. It's just so upsetting to see these subtitles here. And I'm not even a family member. I'm just a rail mother of a frontline rail worker. I can only imagine, you know, how his family must feel knowing this and now knowing, at least his parents know what I have discovered about their son's death. Okay, so just continuing on page 21 of this report, it states the crew reacted quickly and took care to provide comfort and emergency response under difficult circumstances. Well, yeah, they tried to respond as quickly as they could, but given your supervising conductor is a half a mile or, you know, potentially up to 2/3 of a mile away from you in the dark, how quickly can you react? You know, it was the locomotive engineers that had to basically get out of the unit and run to try and help conductor trainee Jason Clooney. So again, more brainwashing. Yeah, they reacted as quickly as they could, and it would have been a lot quicker had there been proper supervision. Okay, now on page 22, we see safety actions taken. These to me are so minimal when a person is killed and there's so many violations of so many laws going on in the rail industry. You know, you have to look at this. Okay, so safety action taken. Sounds like a great title, but is it really worth anything? Let's see what they did. Transportation Safety Board Rail Safety Advisory Letter. On the 19th of December 2013, the Transportation Safety Board issued a Rail Safety Advisory Letter to Transport Canada, identifying the potential risks associated with switching operations, specifically concerning the proximity of the conductor to the trainee while supervising task performance. Okay, so you sent a letter to Transport Canada. Why did you not ask for a criminal investigation in matters pertaining to criminal negligence causing death, maybe at CN Rail and Transport Canada? Why wasn't that done? Just my humble opinion. If it was me, that's what I would have done. Okay, now Transport Canada on February 4th of 2014 responded to this accident, and it's being investigated by Transport Canada's Prairie and Northern Surface Regional Office under the authority of the Canada Labour Code Part 2. Okay, so why did it take so long? Conductor trainee Jason Clooney was killed on November 18th, 2013. So it took, let's see, a good 7 to 8 weeks for Transport Canada to respond um, to labor code violations. You know, not exactly the sharpest tack in the box as far as I'm concerned when it comes to Transport Canada. And then it says an investigation report will be completed by its investigators. Once complete, the report will be provided to the employer and to the local health and safety committee for review and action as required. Again, it's pretty obvious that laws were being violated, and those were laws under the jurisdiction of Transport Canada, like SOR 87-150, Section 5, which prevents a trainee from working alone. So why was that not part of this? That's not mentioned anywhere under Transport Canada or safety actions taken. You don't have the Transportation Safety Board telling Transport Canada, hey, rail carriers are violating, laws that are there to protect rail workers. So we're going to investigate the labor code violations, but we're not going to be looking into this other stuff that directly also falls under the jurisdiction of Transport Canada, the one pertaining to SOR 87-150, Section 5. So this is pure garbage as far as safety actions taken, in my humble opinion. In addition, Transport Canada indicated that it has identified the issue of trainee supervision in its risk-based business plan for the upcoming program year, and it's developing risk control actions to address it. When they're the ones that are part of the problem and not doing their job potentially for decades, there's a huge issue with that. And ask me if, I would have any confidence of anything being done properly at Transport Canada when it comes to frontline railway worker training programs and or proper death investigations. Just don't buy it anymore, folks. The gig's up, and I think people are starting to see where the problems truly lie. So then, Canadian National Railway, well, what did they do? On November 21st of 2013, which would have been 3 days after Jason's death, CN issued a safety flash to its Western Region employees, explaining the details of the accident. Really? Were they telling them about, how CN was not instructing supervising conductors in how to supervise a trainee? Did they tell them that they were in violation of SOR 87-150, Section 5, when conductor trainee Jason Clooney was allowed to work alone in violation of the law? No, we reminded employees to comply with all rules and regulations, including the following. Note the list of rules here. The General Operating Instructions, Section 8, regarding expecting the movement of trains. That poor conductor trainee wasn't expecting a train to come back onto him. And, if he would have had the supervising conductor trained properly by CN Rail, it would have been a non-issue. They would have seen the train coming or heard it. Then you've got Canadian Rail operating rules, and not just that. The supervising conductor would have caught the fact that the switch had been flipped the wrong way. That's the primary reason conductor trainee Jason Clooney was killed. Now, Canadian Rail Operating Rule 104B regarding hand-operated switches. You know, again, we're focusing on a rule not enforceable in court rather than the violations of the laws by CN Rail here. Special instructions regarding Canadian Rail Operating Rule 106, peer-to-peer communications between crew members. Yeah, they were probably communicating by radio, and there's an old saying, garbage in, garbage out. So the trainee did say he had lined the switch for the main track, as opposed to misaligning it for the siding, which is what he did. So as far as the proper communication, you know, I don't care if you're having radio communications between the conductor trainee and the supervising conductor who's at least half a mile away in the dark. Garbage in, garbage out. Somebody had to be there to catch the fact that the conductor trainee, a trainee, had flipped the switch the wrong way when CN knew that this conductor trainee had problems with working alone or independently and with switching operations. Completely inexcusable in my humble opinion. And then the Canadian Rail Operating Rule 123.2, switching by radio. Again, another rule not enforceable in court. Regulations and acts absolutely are. And that includes other acts like the Labor Code, the regulations pertaining to safety management systems, etc., etc., etc. Okay, and then the Canadian Rail Operating Rule General C, which regards expecting a movement, track unit or equipment to move at any time. Oh, the conductor just wasn't expecting that movement to come up behind him and kill him. So, you know, look at here. They're focused completely on Canadian Rail Operating Rules. CN doesn't want to focus on anything tied to violations of laws, such as regulations and acts, which are there to protect frontline rail workers. So a complete brainwashing of rail families and of taxpayers reading this report. Almost every line of it, quite frankly, in my opinion, is pure garbage. And we haven't even done the entire report yet. I'm going to be coming back to certain sections that I had to skip over. But again, you can see there are so many problems with this report. It's not even funny. And the other reports pertaining to this death are, in my opinion, just as bad. On December 2nd, 2013, CN issued a notice within the Western region with the information contained in the November flash and added a reminder to employees of item 12.3 of their general operating instructions, pushing equipment, observing from the ground. You know, again, general operating instructions at CN Rail, irrelevant, not enforceable in court. Why are you focusing on this? Well, it's because we're CN Rail and we don't want to put the blame where it really belonged. So it says both the flash and the notice reminded employees of the importance of maintaining situational awareness and safety-related focus. Again, they're assuming the guy did not have situational awareness. It's a big assumption because it helps them to make their case that he was the conductor trainee who was, you know, he was disoriented. He didn't know what he was doing. He wasn't paying attention. I'm sorry, I don't buy this garbage. So then the last one, in January 2014, CN issued a system-wide general notice to monitor and record trainee performance, and a need test was established to monitor and record compliance. Well, excuse me, but they were already supposed to be monitoring trainee records and maintaining trainee records and evaluations. So what is that? It's more garbage that, okay, we're going to be putting in place this e-system now. Well, why wasn't IT catching the fact that records for trainee performance were missing? And so on, and so on, and so on. And then on August 5th, 2014, we're on the following page here, page 23, CN issued Operating Bulletin BCN 065, which provided a reminder to employees who are assigned a trainee that they must be in positions a position that provides continuous monitoring of the trainee. Note that it doesn't say that they should be. It says they must be. That's because of SOR 87-150, Section 5, which is a regulation enforceable in court and which is the law. Why did they not issue here a copy of SOR 87-150, Section 5, and say you're not allowed to have a trainee work alone? If you're a supervising conductor, you must be there next to that trainee supervising in case an error is made in switching operations or whatever. I could care less about CN's bulletin. I care about the regulations and the acts. So then it just says this report concludes the Transportation Safety Board's investigation into this occurrence. The report was released on the 24th of September. It was officially released on October 22nd of 2014. So, garbage in, garbage out. And in my opinion, there's a whole lot of garbage in this railway death investigation by the Transportation Safety Board, Transport Canada, and so many others. Folks, this is nothing, in my opinion, but a public scam and a misappropriation of public funds, which is also, another violation of the law. Taxpayers are paying for these garbage investigations and garbage reports to be written. Complete violation of fiduciary laws, and breach of fiduciary trust, breach of public trust, misappropriation of funds to garbage reports and investigations and hearings, etc., etc., etc. It's all criminal, as is criminal negligence causing death and the conspiracy to hide crimes such as criminal negligence causing death. So just my humble opinion, folks, but you are allowed to form your opinions as to the value of reports such as what was provided here. And we have other sections I'm going to go back on and cover, sections that I had skipped over. And you're going to see, basically, in my opinion, this entire report is garbage. Okay, there's something else I wanted to mention when it comes to the safety actions taken by either Transport Canada or the rail carrier in question, whatever. All of these safety bulletins or safety flashes, or whatever, emails that they send out, warning people, telling them about safety issues. They don't prevent issues like this from happening again. So in other words, they're totally worthless because unless you're part of the personnel at the rail carrier at the time that those bulletins go out or those safety advisories, you'd totally miss the issue. You wouldn't be a party to, what the safety concern was. So in my opinion, these safety actions taken, again, they're pure nonsense. They do nothing going forward to address the issues because personnel changes all the time. There's a lot of change as far as the workforce and supervisors and trainers and whatever. So pure garbage. Okay, so just a lot more as far as the brainwashing and how it happens in these railway investigation reports and things for you to look out for to make sure you don't get brainwashed. You need to be able to identify these things, whether or not it's the layout, the wording, the sentence structure, the switching of made-to-fit definitions, and that type of deception that goes on. There's a lot of tactics that are used, and you need to be aware of them in order to know when you're being brainwashed and when you're being lied to. Okay, so this concludes part 5 of the brainwashing video series. I will be seeing you on part 6. Again, like, share, and subscribe. And if you're subscribed, make sure don't get unsubscribed, because again, a lot of people would rather this information did not get out. So make sure you double check, because I hope to put out at least 3 videos per week. And so if you're not seeing videos in notifications and stuff, it's probably because you've been unsubscribed for some unknown reason. And on that note, have a good day. I will see you in part 6.